offices around the perimeter, and I think there's some internal offices too within the lab spaces that you'll see. We have two types of thermostats. The one is very thin, that's just measures temperature. The fatter ones have a CO2 sensor in them as well, so you'll get, and you'll see those mainly in like conference rooms, in offices that have high occupancy. So in some of those interior lab spaces, some of those offices that have 4 people in it, you'll see the fatter ones, and that's pretty typical. You also see them, so there's one here installed. The building will be set up on a schedule based on CSU of what they're going to occupy the building and what they're going to unoccupy the building. So for the most part, when you guys come in, your thermostat is going to read, you'll display a temperature on it. That temperature that's displayed there is actually your set point. So it's supposed to maintain a 70 degree. This one's reading 70. If you touch it, if you touch it, it'll go into its first menu, and it's a temperature, and it'll show you where you what your set point is, and you can adjust that. And you have 10-degree deadband, or a 10-degree span from 65 to 75 degrees. Now the thermostat's going to be happy, and the heating system or the cooling system is going to be happy if it's within 2 degrees of that. So we have like a little deadband, so that allows our system to not just overshoot and then undershoot. It'll slowly creep up to that set point. My suggestion, if you're too hot in your room, when the building is in a heating mode, specifically in the perimeters, you have baseboard along your walls. And so that is your first stage of heat. So that's a radiant heat, and it's going to wash the windows. It's not going to increase any airflow into your room at first, but after 15 minutes, if your set point, if your space is not happy, it'll cause the airflow to increase, that heating valve to open up, and more hot air to come into the room. I suggest that if you are cold one day, set it to like say you don't want to crank it up to like 75 and be like, oh, it'll be good in like an hour. Just let that system kind of fluctuate and average out over like 12 hours. You should see some temperature increase, but to get to a really happy point for you guys, I'd probably give it a day and be like the next day, man, it's still really cold. Then definitely, if it's not responding appropriately in that regard, just know that definitely make a call then. But the CO2 ones, there's a little menu, and you can jump over and you can see how much CO2 is in there. We measure that CO2 so that we can increase airflow into those spaces. When it gets above a certain level, it alarms, and then it just opens up a damper and comes more fresh air in. So if you guys have any questions, definitely I'm more than happy to answer any other questions really than that. Like I said, you can set it up and you can set it down 10 degrees. It does have that 2-degree deadband, but it's a fairly simple thermostat. So if you do come in after hours, this will be in an unoccupied mode, and it'll say unoccupied. You'll walk up to it, it'll look like this, but when you dive into it, it won't show some of the normal kind of graphics on there, little house and stuff. It'll say unoccupied. You have a 2-hour override for that. And you can just hit the timer and bump it up to 2 hours or 1 hour or whatever. And so if you're uncomfortable, that room should heat up or cool down a little bit during that time frame to help you out. The unoccupied set point, so if you haven't messed with anything, our defaults are 70 degrees, basically for all rooms, except for like a server room that we bump those down to like 68. And also depending on the heat load in your room. If you have a lot of equipment, anything like that, obviously it's going to affect that temperature in the room, and maybe 68 is your happy 70. So, so when you come in and it is unoccupied, you can do that and set that timer, and then it'll time out after 2 hours and go back to its unoccupied set point, which is 68 degrees. Your unoccupied cooling set point is at 74 degrees. So if your room really warms up, cooling's not going to kick on until the thermostat reads a 74 degrees. Typically it's 72. And then that cooling signal starts to cool the room. So like I said, the first stage of heat is going to be that baseboard, and you can feel it. They're really safe nowadays. Back in the day, would really get smoking hot, and you don't want to put any plastic or anything like that across it or anything, but just be aware that those things are hot, and when you touch them, they are pretty hot. What else? Okay, so that's for the office spaces. I didn't bring the Phoenix controller in there because it's really simple. It's just a slider, and it slides up and down. And I think off of those inside your lab spaces, it's a little beige-looking device. It's about that big. You've probably seen them. But those, like I said, just a slider on the side, like a kind of a thermostat, and you can slide it up, increase the heat, or slide it down to cool down the space. The Phoenix valves that maintain those spaces are very tightly controlled, so just know that we're trying to maintain a negative space there. Also, I've noticed, not so much lately, as moving has kind of stopped a little bit, but leaving those perimeter, on the outside of the labs, those doors open, that really makes the system kind of fluctuate quite a bit, because we're trying to maintain a negative pressure there. And then the outside of the spaces, the perimeter of the building, actually maintains a different space pressure. So we're trying to manage that. And when you leave doors open, stuff like that, specifically in the space, it's a negative situation, you're creating a positive situation. So you'll see some of those APMs, they're air pressure monitors. There's only a few. There's like one on this side, one on this side of the building as you enter into the main lab spaces. Those might start to alarm and stuff like that when you do leave doors open. They should maybe go into alarm for just a second, but it's like a little nuisance. And then once you close the door behind you, it should go back to a normal state within a couple minutes.
You said that again. So yeah. The internal labs are supposed to have negative pressure, is that right?
Yeah, so those lab spaces are negative, specifically because you have the hoods there. So those are drawing air out. And then we have the 2 heat recovery units on the roof. Those are actually the main exhaust for those. So all the air that you're getting inside the lab is probably 70 to 80% outside air. So it's all fresh air.
And then the hallways and the offices, those are on the same pressure system? Or the offices and the hallway at a different pressure?
Those are going to be a positive, but only slightly positive. So you want the building, the exterior of the building to be slightly positive to keep out the heat and the cold out of the building, but we're still trying to maintain that negative space on the interior. Yeah, cool. So okay. It's a nice little dance. So, but what else? So 2-hour delay when you come in unoccupied. Other than that, you'll see some of these glowing. There'll be either some of them are like an amber color, a blue color, a red color. Also, if you come up and your stat says no communication or it's red, we'd like to know that. That's something's in our system's not working. That's not communicating correctly to the box. If there's no power at all, also at it, please let us know. Also, I understand you guys know your office numbers, but on the stat itself, it's labeled. It'll say like STB 3 if you're on the 3rd floor, and like 36. So that number right there, if you're have any issues, please include that, because that helps us say, oh, that's exactly that box, because that box might serve 2 different spaces. And also note that I would say 99% of the time, the VAV that's serving your office serves another office too. So you're going to have to get acquainted with your neighbor to find a happy medium, because typically if you have a thermostat in your office, you're the end of line. And so we want to make sure that you guys have enough air or the comfort level is maintained at the end of that line, and it might affect the person that's before you. So just remember that and be kind. So everybody can fight about it. So there's also windows, obviously, you can pop open if you do get hot or whatever. But please let us know if you do have issues, and we'll try and get them resolved as soon as possible. It's been taking about a week or something to get that communication back to us. And as we start wrapping up the building and the sequencing and stuff, we won't be here as much. And so a lot of that calls are going to go to CSU. And I'd like to address all of them, at least if there is a bigger issue, earlier on before we actually pull off site and leave. So please let us know if you guys have any issues. More than happy. And you can up that through Megan or Tracy Abel if you know her as well. So and she can get those to us. So You guys have any questions? Sure.
So if I have an animal room with a slider, and
Okay.
I've put it all the way up,
Yes.
and it is still way below the temperature we need it,
Okay.
then I'm doing it right, and there's nothing else to do.
Perfect. Yes. But if you're needing a specific temperature in a
Yes.
room, please communicate that to Tracy
We have
because.
already done so,
Okay.
and they said it was fixed, but it has not changed temperature.
Okay. And this is internal space. Is this for
For fish.
the fish?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know that Jerry with Phoenix came in and increased the set points. I was just in that room and I didn't see a temperature change either.
Yeah.
So I'll talk back. I'll get back in touch with Jerry
Okay.
and figure out.
So it's
What?
not that we're doing something wrong, it's
Absolutely not.
that it's not set right yet.
And so, also, we have other things that we can do behind the scenes to increase that temperature if we need to. We can open up with heating valve more, whatever. But we've restricted you to a certain deadband so that you need to work within. And so if there's specific needs that need to meet that room, please, so again, like I said, I'll check with Jerry and try and get back to you.
Okay.
I think is there 2 rooms on 3?
Yeah.
And then there was an additional room that was possibly talked about on 2, is that correct?
I know there's another room on 2, I don't know how their
Okay. Is that
temperature is
gazebo?
doing, but we're on the 3rd floor and
Okay, all
we're
right.
monitoring it, so.
Okay, and so I think I was just up there today and it looked like it was still at 70. And you
Yeah.
wanted like 70,
72
Two.
minimum.
okay, minimum?
We don't want
And
it
so
to
we
go
were shooting
below.
for 74, I
Yeah,
think, is what
that'd
we
be
wanted.
perfect.
Yeah, so between 76 and, okay, cool.
Great,
So I will follow up with them.
okay,
And I'll let Tracy know.
Thanks.
Hopefully that gets resolved.
Are you also gonna teach us about the lighting, or is that
I
someone
do
else?
not do lighting.
Okay.
The electricians did all the lighting and
Great.
those are some kind of cool, some of them are kind of cool. I've never seen like the time and stuff like that on those.
Yeah.
Those are pretty neat.
That's also
So-
a problem that we're trying to solve,
Okay.
so it's everywhere.
Because we also can't move our animals in until we can control the lights in.
Yeah.
That's the other
The fish
thing.
are still waiting in the old building.
So thanks for bearing with us. We do have some residual work that we're trying to get through, but you guys have been very patient and I do sincerely appreciate that. So like I said, if you have any issues, please don't hesitate to give us a ring. So, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Yes.